My dirty late-night call with AP got leaked. Husband played it at our friend's reunion. I used to look at my marriage and think we were untouchable, but now I know that that's not true. James and I had something solid and real. Not the kind of love that burns and fizzles out, but the kind that stays. We weren't without our flaws. No relationship is. But for years we were good. We rarely ever argued and always found our way back to each other when we did. He was my best friend and my partner. He was my person. And for a while that was enough. It was everything I could have asked for until a few months ago, when everything began to shift in ways I didn't see coming. It started when James got a new job, and we decided to move back to our hometown to be closer to his work. He'd been offered a senior position there, and even though my heart sank the moment he suggested it, I said yes. I told myself it would be fine and that it was just another chapter for us. But deep down, I knew better. There's a reason I left this town in the first place. There were too many memories and too many people I didn't care to see again. I'd built a life far away from all that, one that I liked. But love makes you do things you don't always want to, so I came back with him for him. At first it wasn't so bad. I tried to convince myself that maybe I'd been overreacting, and maybe it could be good for us. But things got harder to deal with the moment James reconnected with an old mutual friend, Gabrielle. It all started innocently enough. Just a casual mention of her name one evening and a story about running into her downtown. I remember nodding, smiling, and pretending it didn't bother me. But then her name started coming up more and more. Suddenly, she was all he could talk about. Gabrielle this, Gabrielle that. I'd never cared much for her, even back when we were younger. She was the kind of girl people liked too easily because she was never herself. She would just be what people wanted to be. I told myself it was stupid to feel jealous. James and Gabrielle hadn't been close in years. They'd been friends, sure, maybe something a little more once upon a time, but that was before me and before us. Still, I couldn't help myself, because I knew the history. I knew the way he used to look at her, and the way her name had once been a sore spot for him. I tried to ignore it. God knows I tried. I told myself it was all in my head, and that I was just being paranoid or insecure. But the more I saw him laughing at his phone late at night, the harder it became to quiet that ugly voice in my head. The one that whispered and told me something was off. He'd sit on the couch, smiling down at his screen like a teenager, and when I'd ask who he was talking to, he'd shrug it off with a casual, "Oh, just Gabrielle." Then came the meetups, these little catching-up coffee dates that seemed harmless enough at first, until they weren't. Because suddenly it wasn't just coffee. It was lunch, then dinner, then long phone calls at odd hours. The whole thing was slowly driving me crazy. The night all my calm and quiet came crashing down started out like any other. I came home after running errands, still half distracted by a work email on my phone, and froze in the doorway when I heard laughter from the kitchen. It wasn't just any laughter. It was hers. Gabrielle stood by the counter, smiling as she watched James stir something on the stove. They were laughing like old times, like I hadn't just walked in on something that made my blood hot. My husband's face lit up when he saw me, completely oblivious to my anger. "Hey, babe," he said with an easy smile. "You're home early." Gabrielle turned, her eyes bright as she rushed over. "Oh my God, it's been so long," she said, wrapping me in a hug before I could even process what was happening. I forced a polite smile, my body stiff in her arms. She kept squealing about how excited she was to see me and how she couldn't wait for us to catch up. "Of course," I said, and tried to keep my voice steady, even though I wanted to scream. "It's been a while." I kept my cool through the entire dinner. I smiled at the right moments, nodded along to their stories, even poured her more wine when her glass was empty. I don't know how I managed it, but the second the front door closed behind her, all that fake politeness disappeared. "What the hell was that?" I demanded. James blinked at me, obviously confused, and then started collecting the empty glasses. "What do you mean?" "Don't act clueless," I snapped. "You brought her here? To our house?" He looked genuinely confused, which only made me angrier. "Gabby and I have been planning to do dinner for a while," he said slowly, like he was explaining it to a child. "I thought it'd be nice if she came here so you guys could talk too. You guys used to be friends." "We were never close," I scoffed, "and I see you've gotten really comfortable again, if you're already calling her Gabby." He frowned and set the glasses down on the counter. Why are you acting like this?" "Because you've been starry-eyed over her for weeks," I shot back. "You can't go 2 minutes without mentioning her name, and now she's in our kitchen like she lives here." I was practically yelling at that point, but I couldn't help it. For a moment, there was silence as he just stared at me. But then, to my disbelief, he smiled. "Oh my God, you're jealous," he said as he stepped closer to me. The word made me frown, but before I could respond, he reached for my hand. "Babe," he said softly, "I love you. You have nothing to worry about. Gabrielle and I are just friends. Nothing's going on, I promise." Something in his tone, how warm and reassuring he sounded, chipped away at my anger. The sincerity in his eyes and the way he squeezed my hand like he meant it. I wanted to stay mad, I really did, but instead I sighed and felt the tension slowly drain from my shoulders. "See," he murmured, pulling me into his arms. "Everything's fine. You know you're the only one for me." For a second, I felt stupid, embarrassed for letting my jealousy get the best of me. I rested my head against his chest and sighed again, thinking maybe, just maybe, I'd overreacted. We made up that night, and after that, I told myself it was over and that Gabrielle really was nothing to worry about. But as it turns out, she wasn't the only ghost from the past that would come back to haunt us. And what was coming next made all of that feel like child's play. I really thought things would start to get better after that night. James had reassured me, hugged me, promised that I had nothing to worry about, and I wanted to believe him. For a while, I did. But instead of getting better, everything just got so much worse. Once we properly settled back in town, Gabrielle became this constant, unshakable presence in our lives. It was like she'd attached herself to us, or more specifically, to James. Everywhere I turned, there she was. She'd drop by under the flimsiest excuses like, "I was just in the neighborhood," or "I brought you that recipe I mentioned." And somehow, James never thought it was weird. To him, she was just a friend reconnecting. To me, she was like a parasite. She was constantly around him, constantly touching his arm when she talked and leaning in close when they shared a laugh. I'd sit there sometimes, pretending to scroll through my phone while silently counting the number of times she said his name in a single conversation. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just being paranoid again, but deep down, I knew better. Every time I tried to even slightly bring it up, James would get that same look on his face, this exasperated look like I was dragging him into another pointless argument. He would sigh and then mutter, "Not this again, babe." And just like that, I'd drop it. What else could I do? If I pushed, I was jealous. If I stayed quiet, I was distant. So I learned to swallow my irritation, smile when Gabrielle came around, and keep my thoughts to myself. But it kept getting worse. She'd talk endlessly about how glad she was that we'd moved back, and how much she'd missed us. She'd go on about how we all needed to see our old friends and make up for lost time. I couldn't stand it, and I couldn't stand her. And most of all, I couldn't stand how comfortable she'd gotten with my husband in my home. It was like I was the outsider in my own marriage. For the first time since we'd moved back, I was actually grateful for the town I'd always hated, because at least it gave me an escape. My parents still lived in the same old house, and suddenly, that became my sanctuary. I started spending most of my time there under the guise of helping out and spending time with them. My mom was thrilled, of course. She thought I was finally embracing being back home. But really, I was just running away from my problems. Then came the day that changed everything. I'd been at my parents' place all day. My mom and I had been chatting in the garden, and I decided I wanted to make dinner for them. But when I checked the pantry, it was practically empty. So I offered to go out and grab a few groceries, and I drove to the nearest store. I was halfway through the produce aisle when I heard someone say my name. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me turn. And that's when I saw him. Bruce. For a second, neither of us said anything. We just stood there staring at each other, both frozen in place. He looked older, of course. A little broader around the shoulders and a little scruffier than I remembered, but still unmistakably him. The same dark eyes and crooked smile. My heart did this weird stutter I didn't expect. Then he grinned, stepped forward, and pulled me into a hug before I could even think. "I can't believe it," he said, and then laughed against my ear. "I heard you'd moved back. Was wondering when I'd bump into you." I laughed too, a little shakily. Guess the universe didn't want us waiting too long. We both forgot about our groceries after that. We just started walking up and down the aisles, talking and catching up. It felt so surreal, seeing him again after all that time and after everything that happened between us. He looked different, sure, but the way he talked and the way he listened, it was all so familiar. The kind of familiarity that felt warm and dangerous all at once. I thought seeing him again wouldn't be good. He was one of the people I'd been trying to avoid, and I kept waiting for the awkwardness to kick in, for the weight of our past to press down on the conversation. But it never did. He was warm and welcoming, teasing in that same easy way that used to make me laugh. After the way things ended, I didn't think he'd even want to see me, let alone act like that. But he did. And honestly, I was glad, because the truth was, I'd missed him. We finally parted ways in the parking lot. He gave me that same crooked smile and said, "Don't be a stranger, all right?" before walking off. I stood there for a moment, watching him go, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. When I got back to my parents' house, they'd already found something else to eat, but I didn't care. I unpacked the groceries anyway, smiling like an idiot as I replayed our interaction. The next day, I went home to James and told him about it right away. I wasn't hiding anything. I was actually excited to tell him. I even made a joke about it. I said something about us running into all our old friends before Christmas, with the way we kept bumping into them. But he didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just stared at me, his expression suddenly unreadable. "What?" I asked, frowning. "Are you sure," he said slowly, "that Bruce is someone you want to bump into?" I blinked. What's that supposed to mean? He shrugged, but his jaw was tight. "It's just that you two have history. I just want to make sure you're not setting yourself up for anything." "James," I said, trying not to sound offended. Things might have gotten intense back then, but we were still friends. It's been years. We're adults now. He didn't respond, just kept frowning and rubbing his jaw in that way he did when something was bothering him. I realized what was going on before he even opened his mouth. "You're jealous," I accused, and he scoffed. "I'm not jealous." "Yes, you are," I said, crossing my arms. "You absolutely are. You should see your face right now." "I'm not," he said again, but his voice was sharper. "Please," I said, shaking my head. "You don't even have the right to be." He frowned deeper. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said. "You've been practically attached at the hip to Gabrielle for weeks, and I'm supposed to just smile and deal with it. But the second I run into someone from my past, you suddenly care?" "That's different," he snapped. "How is it different?" "Because I was never in love with Gabrielle," he said, louder than he probably meant to, and the words hung heavy between us. I stared at him for a while, something ugly rising in my chest. "Wow," I said finally. "So that's your excuse? That makes it okay?" He sighed and rubbed a hand over his face. "I'm just saying I know what Bruce was to you. I know how easy it was for you to get swept up by him." That did it. "Are you kidding me?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. "You're actually standing here lecturing me about being swept up when you can't even go a day without Gabrielle in your ear? You're unbelievable." We went back and forth for what felt like forever. Him insisting he wasn't jealous, me insisting he was. His voice rising, mine matching it. It was messy and loud and so far from who we were that it almost scared me. It ended with me calling him a hypocrite. I didn't even wait for his response. I just turned, stormed into our bedroom, and started grabbing clothes from the dresser. I could hear him following me down the hall, still talking, still trying to make his point, but I wasn't listening anymore. I stuffed a few more things into a bag and walked straight out. I didn't even bother saying goodbye. As I drove back to my parents' house, the anger burned hot in my chest. Not just at him, but at the sheer audacity and the fact that after everything, he was the one accusing me. It would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. All over Bruce. Over a random run-in at a grocery store, even though things were so long over between me and Bruce. Or at least that's what I thought. I started to calm down when I got to the house, and I started to see where he was coming from, if only just a little. Part of me could understand why James was worried. I've had the same thoughts about Gabrielle. I got so scared of her because of her history with James, but I had history of my own with Bruce, and ours was a lot worse. Back in college, we were all in the same friend group. There was me, James, Bruce, Gabrielle, and a few others whose names I can barely remember now. We'd hang out after classes and party on the weekends. Back then, James had this weird thing going on with Gabrielle. They were sort of dating, but they never put a label on it. Still, everyone knew what it was. I had a similar thing with Bruce, and honestly, I never thought I'd fall for someone like him. He was loud, kind of obnoxious, and always trying to be the center of attention. The type of guy who cracked inappropriate jokes just to get a reaction. But then one night, everything shifted. I'd gotten too drunk at a house party, and Bruce, of all people, had been the one to make sure I got back to my dorm safely. He walked me back, held my hair when I got sick, and made sure I had water and that my phone was charged. He even waited until I fell asleep before leaving. That night changed how I saw him. Suddenly, he wasn't just the loud guy with a big ego. He was also kind, protective, and surprisingly gentle. That was when it started. He'd walk me to class and bring me coffee. Before long, we were together. We dated for a while in junior year. I did love him, in my own way, but Bruce, he loved me way more. His love was intense, consuming even. He wanted to be around me all the time and wanted to know everything about me. It was sweet at first, but then it started to feel like too much. When James and I started taking an elective together, Bruce didn't like it. I could see the anger in his eyes whenever I talked about James. And to be fair, I understood why. James was easy to talk to, and funny in a quiet way that didn't demand attention. The more time I spent with him, the more I realized how different he was from Bruce. Then, after months of subtle flirting and study sessions that lasted way too long, I knew I had to make a choice. And when you found out that James and Gabrielle were no longer a thing, the answer never seemed clearer. I broke up with Bruce a few months later. He didn't take it well. He begged me not to go, told me he loved me, and that I was everything he'd ever wanted. But I was already gone and completely in love with James. James and I started dating not long after. We stayed together through the rest of junior year and all through senior year. A few years after graduation, we got married and moved away. We built a life together. And then, because of work, we ended up back here, in the same town where it all started. I didn't realize how much that would stir up old things. Even after spending the entire day at my parents' house, following our fight, I couldn't bring myself to face James. I just wanted space. I told myself I'd go home later that night, but when I glanced at my phone and saw Bruce's name, the contact I'd just saved the night before, it felt like an opportunity to catch up or distract myself, or even to spite James just a little. I wasn't sure. We agreed to meet at this little pastry shop not too far from my parents' place. When I got there, Bruce was already waiting, leaning against his car with that same cocky grin he used to wear. Except now, it didn't look boyish, it looked mature. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me he'd enlisted after college, then came back home and joined the police force. I told him about my job as an editor, about the years James and I spent away from here. It was nice and easy, like we'd just slipped back into how things used to be. I didn't mean for it to become a habit, but that first meeting turned into another, then another. Afternoons with Bruce started to feel like part of my routine. Even after I went back home and James gave me those cold glares, I still went. I told myself it was innocent, just catching up with an old friend, like James was. And even if it wasn't completely innocent, if Bruce's compliments made my heart stutter, or if his looks lingered too long, it was fine. After all, James deserved it. He'd spent months throwing Gabrielle in my face, talking about her all the time. Maybe now he could feel a little of what I felt. That was what I was thinking when I decided to keep seeing Bruce. The more strained things got with James, the more drawn I felt to Bruce's warmth. He made me laugh and made me feel like I was the center of attention. It was so different from having to share James's attention with Gabrielle. Then one afternoon, he suggested we meet at the park, the same one we used to go to in college. I got there a little late, and by the time I arrived, it was already getting dark. We walked around for a while, talking about everything from work to old classmates. Then we got some takeout and sat on a bench to eat. It was comfortable and familiar. After all the drama with James, it was a nice return to simplicity. By the time he walked me back to my car, it was dark. I could feel the quiet tension between us growing heavier. He looked like he wanted to say something, but didn't. "What?" I teased, trying to break the silence. "You look like you're about to confess something." He exhaled slowly and rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't think I can keep doing this." My stomach dropped. "Doing what?" "This," he said, motioning between us. "Hanging out, pretending it's just friendly." "Why?" I asked, even though part of me already knew. He gave me a sad little smile. "Because you have to know I'm still in love with you." I froze and my mind went blank. "I thought I was over it," he continued. "But then I saw you in that store looking even more beautiful than I remembered, and it hit me that I'm not. I don't think I ever was." I should have said something. I should have pulled back and told him how crazy he sounded. But instead, all I could think about was how close we'd gotten again, and how easy it was to fall into old patterns. He reached out, his hand warm against my cheek. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "I just needed you to know so you weren't confused when I did this." And then he leaned in. I should have stopped him and I should have pulled away. But when his lips touched mine, I melted. The kiss wasn't gentle, it was desperate and intense. And it felt good, too good. His hands moved down my back, over my waist, pulling me closer until I could feel his heartbeat against mine. I knew I should have stopped it and that it was wrong, but every rational thought slipped away. When things started to get heated, it didn't even feel like a decision anymore. It felt inevitable. We ended up in the back seat of my car, and the way he touched me made me forget everything else. It all disappeared under the weight of his body and the sound of his voice. When it was over, I sat there catching my breath, waiting for the guilt to set in. In a weird way, I knew I was in trouble when it didn't. And that was how it started. I used to think affairs were these dramatic, hate-fueled things born out of broken marriages and resentment. But it wasn't like that. It was just selfishness, plain and simple. I didn't hate my husband. I loved him, more than anything. But I also loved the way Bruce made me feel. So I did what I did, and one night became another, and another. Before I even realized it, Bruce and I were having an affair. The affair became exactly what you'd imagine an affair to be, messy and secretive, full of lies I never thought I was capable of telling. There were the hidden texts and late-night calls. There was sneaking around and careful excuses. Sometimes it almost felt like living a double life. One where I was the neglected wife trying to keep her marriage from falling apart, and another where I was the woman who could be as reckless as she wanted. It helped that things between James and me still weren't great. We'd learned how to coexist in silence, just hovering around each other and sharing the same space, but not really being in it together. He spent most of his time at work or in his study, and I avoided him whenever I could. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had become the very thing I accused him of being, but at that time, I didn't care about who was wrong or right. I was still too bitter over Gabrielle's presence and too angry that he had never admitted how inappropriate it was. It was easier to stay angry than to face what I was doing. So I spent most of my days with my parents, pretending to be the daughter taking a little break to clear her head. And at night, I was with Bruce. My parents thought I was spending time with James, and James thought I was staying at my parents'. It was lie after lie then, and it was easy to do at first, but the more I did it, the more it started to actually weigh on me. I was deceiving the people that mattered most to me, and it didn't feel good. For a while, I could ignore it. Bruce made it easy to forget the rest. The thrill of seeing him and the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world, it all numbed whatever guilt I might have felt. But as the weeks passed, the weight of it started pressing down on me. I'd lie awake after he dropped me off and wonder how long I could keep doing it. I was considering ending it when one night, while I was staying at my parents', my phone lit up. It was Bruce. It was late, after midnight, and I hesitated before answering. His voice was breathy and deep when he told me that he had been thinking about me and about how much he missed my body. My heart was racing, and all I could do was listen as he said that he couldn't stop picturing me and remembering how I felt. My whole body felt hot at his words, and I wanted to hang up as much as I wanted him to keep going. In the end, the latter won, and I whispered, "Tell me more." And just like that, one thing led to another. His words painted pictures that made me ache, and my replies only fed his fire. Before I knew it, we were having phone sex. It was raunchy and passionate, and I was glad my parents had gone to bed hours ago. It left me flushed and breathless even though we were miles apart, and when it was over, I laid there in the dark with my body trembling. I told myself it was fine and that it was just another mistake in a long line of them. But when I tried to sleep that night, I couldn't. My mind kept spinning and replaying everything, the lies and the sneaking around. I thought about James, how oblivious he was, and how much I was gambling every time I saw Bruce. The guilt finally started to creep in, and it felt terrible. The next morning, I packed up and went home. I was ready for the usual tension, and maybe even another argument. But when I walked through the door, the house was quiet. No Gabrielle in sight. Just James sitting at the kitchen table staring blankly. He greeted me, his tone soft, and before I could go upstairs, he asked if we could talk. I was hesitant and scared he'd somehow found something out, but I said sure, and sat down with him. "I owe you an apology," he started, "for the way I've been acting, for accusing you, and for everything with Gabrielle." He exhaled. "I was being a hypocrite. The time apart made me realize how much I've taken you for granted." I just stared at him. I didn't know what to say. "I don't want to keep fighting," he continued. "I love you, and I know things haven't been great lately, but I want to fix that. And if you still want to be friends with Bruce, that's okay. I trust you." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. My throat felt tight. He was apologizing, offering me forgiveness I didn't deserve, while I had already betrayed him over and over again. I sat there with the weight of what I'd done, unable to speak. Before I could even process it, he added, "I've been limiting how much I talk to Gabrielle, and she hasn't been around much. After the reunion she's planning, I'll cut things off completely." "The reunion?" I asked, my voice sounding small. He nodded. "Yeah, Gabrielle's organizing a little get-together for our old college group since we're all back in town. Bruce will probably be there too if you still want to see him." It felt like someone had punched me in the chest. Gabrielle was planning it. James was trying to make things right. And Bruce being in the same room with me and James sounded like the worst idea. I forced a smile and told him that it sounded great. He reached across the table, covering my hand with his, and told me that he just wanted us to get back to where we were. "Me too," I said, even though it felt like there was a knot in my throat. He stood up and pressed a kiss to my forehead before pulling me into a hug. It should have been a comforting moment, but all I could think about was how wrong it all was. How he was there trying to make amends while I'd already betrayed him in every possible way. When I pulled back, I knew what I needed to do. I had to end it with Bruce, before the reunion, before everything blew up. The next few days, I ignored his calls. I didn't reply to his texts, and didn't meet up with him. I focused on James instead, and patching things up. But Bruce didn't take the hint, though. He kept calling, leaving messages that ranged from soft and pleading to frustrated and demanding. Finally, I agreed to meet him, just once, to make things clear. We met at our usual pastry shop. He looked different this time, restless and on edge. "I was starting to think you were avoiding me," he said, his tone sharp. "I was," I admitted. "Bruce, this has to stop." He frowned and asked what I meant. I told him that it was over and whatever we had couldn't keep happening. He looked upset and like he was about to start arguing, but I beat him to it and told him that I needed to focus on my marriage and that I couldn't keep sneaking around with him. He leaned back in his chair with narrowed eyes. "So that's it? You're just done?" "I'm sorry," I said, trying to sound firm. "But yes, it's over. And Bruce, please don't come to the reunion." He blinked. "What?" "Stay away from it, from me, from James, from all of it." I told him firmly, and then I stood up and grabbed my things. He just stared at me for a long time and stayed silent, his expression unreadable. "I mean it," I said. "If you care about me at all, you'll listen and stay away." That was the last thing I told him before I left. My hands were shaking as I walked away, but I didn't look back. By the time I got to my car, my heart was pounding, but I felt lighter and relieved. I had really thought that, just like that, it was all over, and I could go back to how my life used to be. What I didn't realize then was that Bruce wasn't the kind of man you could walk away from twice. Not without consequences, anyway. For a few days, it actually felt like everything was going to be okay. I'd ended things with Bruce, patched things up with James, and for once, the house didn't feel so heavy. It felt like we were slowly slipping back into what we used to be. The night before the reunion, James came into the living room while I was folding laundry. "Gabrielle and I are meeting up tonight," he said casually, "just to work out some final details for tomorrow." I looked up, surprised, but nodded. "That's fine," I said, and I meant it. I didn't feel the usual sting of jealousy anymore, maybe because I trusted him then, maybe because I knew that after the reunion Gabrielle would be out of the picture for good, and Bruce was already gone. He smiled faintly, kissed my forehead, and said he wouldn't be long. When he left, I felt an odd sort of peace. I spent the evening cleaning and then watching TV. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't angry or hurt or suspicious. I just felt steady. But when James came home later that night, everything felt off. He walked through the door quietly. I turned from the kitchen counter and smiled at him, but he didn't say a word. He just stood there for a few seconds, staring at me. His face was expressionless and a bit cold in a way I couldn't read, and then eventually he just turned and walked past me to go straight to our bedroom. I frowned but didn't follow. I told myself he was probably tired. It had been a long day for both of us. I didn't think much of it. I didn't think I had a reason to. The next day, the reunion started off perfectly. People got there early in the afternoon, old friends I hadn't seen since college. Everything was going great. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed them until then. For the first time since moving back, the town didn't feel so suffocating. Even Gabrielle showed up, and to my own surprise, I didn't feel resentment when I saw her. We actually talked, laughed even. Maybe it was the champagne or the relief of knowing Bruce hadn't shown up, but I felt almost happy. It felt like a fresh start, sort of. Then James cleared his throat and stood up. "I have something special to show everyone," he announced, and everyone quieted down. He explained that it was something he put together for all of us, but it was especially dedicated to me. I smiled, startled but flattered. I had no idea he'd planned something. "What are you up to?" I teased, earning a few playful whistles from our friends. He grinned at me, but there was something tight about it, something I couldn't quite place. "It's just a little surprise," he said. My heart swelled with guilt and pride at the same time as I watched him walk forward. The fact that he'd dedicated something to me made me think that maybe it was his way of showing we were really moving past everything. Everyone watched on with excitement as he pulled out his phone and connected it to the TV. I expected a slideshow or maybe a video montage, but when the screen stayed black and I realized it was just audio, I got confused. "What's this?" I asked, still smiling. But James didn't answer. He just looked at me for a moment, and the look on his face was one I could only describe as hatred. Before I could say anything, he pressed play. At first, all I heard was static, then a man's voice. It was Bruce, and then my voice. It took a few seconds to register what I was hearing, and then my blood ran cold. I knew it was that night. The late call. Our voices rang out for a while, and soon enough, it was our shared moans. It all echoed through the speakers. It was unmistakably us. The room went dead silent as the recorded call continued to play. At first, I couldn't even move. Any violation I felt over Bruce recording our call was overshadowed by the intense mortification I felt. Everyone was looking at me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Every sound felt too loud. My own voice, moaning, begging, saying Bruce's name, filled the air. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the ground to swallow me in that moment. Every single face in the room had turned toward me. Some looked confused and others disgusted. Gabrielle had her hand over her mouth, and James was watching me with this cruel, satisfied smile that made my stomach turn. Finally, I snapped out of it. I lunged for the remote, my hands shaking as I managed to turn the TV off. The silence that followed was worse than the audio. I avoided the faces of everyone as I rushed toward James. I grabbed his arm and dragged him into a different room. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd throw up, and all I could say when we were alone was, "How did you even get that?" I stammered through my words. "Bruce was there last night when I met Gabrielle," he explained flatly. After she left, he came up to me and said, You should know what your wife gets up to when you're not around." Then he sent something to me phone and left. My stomach dropped. "No," I whispered. He went on and explained that he didn't know what it was at first, but then he listened to it in the car on his way home, and he almost threw up when he realized what it was. I tried to beg him and tell him that it wasn't what he thought it was, but he gave me a cold look that shit me right up. He laughed bitterly. Don't you dare try to lie to me right now." "Do you have any idea," he continued, "what it was like for me to hear you make those sounds with someone else? To hear you moaning his name?" Tears burned in my eyes. "I made a mistake," I whispered. "I'm sorry." "Sorry?" His tone became mocking then. "You accused me of being unfaithful and being too close to Gabrielle, and all that time you were the one cheating." I reached for him, but he stepped back. I tried to tell him again that it was a mistake, and that I loved him, but he warned me not to say those words to him ever again, and that any love between us was dead and gone. Then took a step closer, still glaring at me, and told me that him playing the audio was just the beginning. He just wanted to make sure all our friends saw me for what I really was before he dealt with me properly. He leaned in. "I'm going to ruin you," he promised. "You have no idea what's coming next." And then he walked out, leaving me shaking and crying in the silence. I stood there for what felt like hours, trying to process what had just happened. It wasn't until I heard voices outside the door that I remembered the whole host of people outside. I knew they'd all heard it. There was no way they couldn't have. When I finally stepped out, I could feel their eyes on me. No one said a word. I didn't wait around for them to. I just grabbed my bag and walked out. I don't even remember the drive to my parents' house. I just remember the way my hands shook on the steering wheel and the way my tears blurred the road. That night I cried until my throat hurt. I called James over and over, but he never picked up, not once. It's been days now since then, and he still hasn't called, hasn't texted or said anything. My parents keep asking what's wrong, but I can't tell them. How could I? How could I explain to them that their daughter destroyed her own marriage and got publicly humiliated in the process? The worst part is knowing the town knows. Word spreads fast here, especially when it's something this scandalous. I can't even step outside without imagining the whispers and stares I'll definitely get. So I've been staying inside, just waiting by my phone and trying to pretend I'm not terrified of when it finally rings and James's name is on the screen. Because I know him, and I know that he meant it when he said he'd ruin me. And I have no idea what's coming next or when to expect it,